A huge AEW return has been confirmed, a major WWE debut has been put on hold, and is Vince McMahon set to avoid facing a judge in the ongoing lawsuit against him? And if you're a regular viewer of the channel and haven't already, be sure to subscribe with notifications turned on so you don't miss the latest pro wrestling news. But first, Tony Khan got physical last night on AEW Dynamite. Last night, AEW would host Dynamite from their home arena of Daly's Place in Jacksonville, Florida, the venue owned by the Khan family that hosted the vast majority of the company's shows during the pandemic. The show would see the follow-up of the recent return of Jack Perry, who assisted the Young Bucks in winning the AEW World Tag Team titles, this Dynasty pay-per-view this past weekend. This was of course coming off the back of the decision to air the footage from the backstage incident at All in London last year between Perry and CM Punk. During the show, the Young Bucks would reveal that the close of the show would see Jack Perry in the ring face to face with Tony Khan, this after they overruled security to let him into the building. When the segment came around, the scapegoat would invite his boss down to the ring in order to address their differences, and this is what he had to say. "Man, it's been a long road. Almost 5 years ago was the very first Double or Nothing, and since then AEW has gone on to change the world. Now Tony, it's no secret that we've had our ups and downs. We haven't always seen eye to eye, but I want to tell you this right now. From the bottom of my heart, I swear to God, the only thing I've ever wanted is what's best for AEW. So I want to ask you to please shake my hand, reinstate me, and let's go on to continue to change the world together." The two men would then embrace in a handshake and a hug before they stood with their hands raised in the ring as a sign that they are now united. However, Jack would then strike Tony in the gut with a microphone as he dropped to the ground, this before the Elite Young Bucks and Kazuchika Okada ran down to the ring to ask Perry what the hell he was doing. However, it soon became clear that they were in on it after the Bucks would then lift Khan up with the TK driver, dropping his head into the canvas. Referees and staff would then rush to the ring to help bring an end to the attack, this before many of the babyface side of the roster joined them. Not only that, but Tony's father Shad also turned up, with many questioning if he's a fantastic seller or had no idea if the angle was a shoot or not. The segment is the first time Tony Khan has been involved in a physical angle on AEW television, as in the past we've only really seen him in an authority role making the occasional announcements, largely in pre-taped segments to camera. As always with AEW booking, the move has received mixed reviews from fans and critics online, although let's take a step back and have a look at how much attention the move could bring to AEW in the weeks ahead. As many football fans know, this week we'll see the NFL Draft, which will be broadcast to millions of homes across the United States and even worldwide. Tony Khan is of course the Chief Football Strategy Officer at the Jacksonville Jaguars, a team owned by his father, and Tony is expected to be in attendance at this week's draft on behalf of his franchise. The official NFL website has already released an article covering the angle, and you'd imagine that Tony will be selling the bump when he's shown on camera at the draft, and commentary are bound to mention it at some point. Interestingly, we already have a report from Fightful Select that shows the lengths Tony's already taken to sell the attack. Last night's Dynamite would see Trent Barretta challenge Chuck Taylor to a parking lot brawl, and according to Fightful, that match is already in the can and was recorded before Dynamite even went live last night. At this taping, Khan was seen wearing a neck brace as a way of selling the attack by the Elite. This leads you to think that the neck brace will be present at the NFL Draft this week, given that it takes place before the parking lot brawl airs. With that said, it seems that the angle has done a good job of at least getting exposure in the mainstream sports space. Whether this actually leads to an increased interest or viewership in the AEW shows themselves remains to be seen, but it's certainly a good use of resources to potentially increase business for the promotion. But what do you think of Tony Khan's Elite segment, and do you think the mainstream coverage will help the company? Let me know in the comments down below. And next up, a member of the Bloodline has been sidelined with injury. On the episode of SmackDown that followed his loss to Jey Uso at WrestleMania 40, Jimmy Uso would be on the end of a beatdown by Solo Sikoa and the newly debuted Tama Tonga, with this marking his removal from Solo's version of the faction. Jimmy has yet to return to television since, and we now seemingly know the reason why he's been taking time off. According to Fightful Select, Jimmy Uso would suffer from an injury at WrestleMania that rules him out of this year's draft that begins later this week, although it remains to be seen how much he will actually miss altogether, and the report notes, Some unfortunate news to emerge out of the WWE draft pool announcements. Fightful Select has learned that Jimmy Uso has been sidelined with an undisclosed injury. We weren't given details on how long he's out, but it was enough to keep him out of the WWE draft pool after being booted from the Bloodline. Whilst Jimmy won't be selectable by either brand for the draft this year, it's worth noting that the remaining Bloodline members Roman Reigns, Solo Sikoa, Tama Tonga and Paul Heyman all make the graphic for Friday's selection. And speaking of that, we now have the official rules for the 2024 edition of the WWE Draft. This coming Friday and Monday will see Night 1 and Night 2 of the draft go down on both SmackDown and Raw, with both nights having their own unique draft pools for the shows to select from. This week, WWE would announce the rules for both nights, with there being some switch-ups from previous years, including all champions being ineligible for selection, and WWE would explain the rules as follows. Champions on each brand will be protected and are not eligible to be drafted. As a result, Damian Priest, Becky Lynch, Awesome Truth and Sami Zayn will remain on Raw. Cody Rhodes, Bayley, A-Town Down Under and Logan Paul will remain on SmackDown. Even though their statuses as champions allows them to go to both brands, WWE Women's Tag Team Champions Asuka and Kairi Sane are eligible to be drafted. They will be assigned to that brand if they lose the titles. Friday's SmackDown will feature 4 rounds of draft picks being announced. Each round will consist of the brands making 2 picks apiece for a total of 16 picks being announced, 8 for SmackDown and 8 for Raw. Monday's Raw will feature 6 rounds of draft picks being announced. Each round will consist of the brands making 2 picks apiece for the total of 24 picks, 12 for Raw and 12 for SmackDown. SmackDown will have the first pick on Friday and Raw will have the first pick on Monday. Rosters will go into effect on Monday, May 6, 2 days after Backlash France. As for the draft pools themselves, this Friday's pool will see the likes of Roman Reigns, Jimmy Uso, LA Knight, Seth Rollins and Liv Morgan available for selection, whilst Monday night will see stars such as CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, Rey Mysterio and Jade Cargill all up for grabs. But if you were the GM of Raw or SmackDown, who would be your number 1 draft pick? Let me know in the comments down below. And next up, could we be set to see the first ever international WrestleMania? The United Kingdom has hosted 2 WWE Premium Live events in recent years, including the Clash at the Castle in Cardiff, Wales in 2022, as well as the Money in the Bank 2023 event in London, England, not to mention the Clash in the Castle coming up in Glasgow, Scotland. At the London show, John Cena would make a surprise appearance to state that the UK would be the perfect place to host WrestleMania, although since then we've had little indication that this will actually happen. However, with the London mayoral elections just around the corner, one candidate is using the possibility of a London Mania to their advantage. Speaking with My London ahead of the election, current mayor and Labour candidate Sadiq Khan would talk of the future of major events in the city, name-dropping WrestleMania as a potential option, and he would say, "If I'm re-elected on 2nd May, I'm determined to go even further and fully cement London's reputation as the undisputed sports capital of the world. I believe that London has the potential to host the first international WrestleMania." It's worth remembering that WWE's Nick Khan, no relation to Sadiq, would state in a recent interview that the Big 4 pay-per-views will be held within the United States and Canada for the foreseeable future, although perhaps a big offer from London could be enough to change the company's mind. The comments have already garnered the attention of WWE CCO, who responded to Sadiq on X with a simple "let's talk," a sign that negotiations could be on the horizon. And next up, a major AEW return has been confirmed. It was announced in December that former AEW World Champion Kenny Omega had been diagnosed with diverticulitis, which required immediate treatment, with the disease keeping him out of action ever since. Omega has since mostly been seen on his Twitch streams, making headlines with many of the topics that he's discussed. With that said, he has been mentioned on AEW television 1 or 2 times, most notably when the Young Bucks announced that the cleaner had been fired from the Elite in March, this before being replaced by his former New Japan Pro-Wrestling rival Kazuchika Okada that night. In light of last night's attack on Tony Khan, it appears that Kenny is now set to respond to his removal from the stable, as well as last night's closing segment, as it's now been made official that Omega will be in attendance next week on AEW Dynamite in his hometown of Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. What Kenny will be doing on that night hasn't been officially confirmed as of yet, although the timing is certainly interesting given what we saw last night at the hands of his former allies amidst the return of Jack Perry. And next up, a major WWE debut has been put on hold. Fans have been anticipating the arrival of a brand new Bloodline member ever since it was reported on WrestleMania weekend that Jacob Fatu had been signed to a contract with WWE. Whilst we have seen Tama Tonga show up and align himself with Solo Sikoa's new version of the group, Fatu is yet to be seen on screens. A recent report would drop from PW Insider that noted Jacob was expected to finally debut on television this week, likely on Friday's episode of SmackDown. However, this plan now appears to have changed. According to an update from Mike Johnson of PW Insider, Jacob Fatu is not slated to be at WWE SmackDown this week, although he says that there is a plan in place, with the next step for the Bloodline saga being laid out in a meticulous manner. Sources tell them that right now there is no plan to rush Fatu's WWE debut. Fatu had been a free agent ever since his deal with Major League Wrestling expired in early 2024, although the former MLW World Heavyweight Champion will seemingly have to wait in the wings for a while longer before he joins his Bloodline family on Raw or SmackDown. And finally, is Vince McMahon set to avoid facing a judge and jury in the ongoing lawsuit against him? We are currently in the post-Vince McMahon era of WWE after the former chairman resigned from his position after a lawsuit was filed against him in January 2024, with claims of physical and emotional abuse, sexual assault, and trafficking made against him by Janelle Grant. The suit claims that McMahon took advantage of Grant during her grieving process after losing both her parents, with her in a financially vulnerable position at the time. This week, Vince's legal team attempted to discredit these claims by Janelle in a 29-page filing, a filing that includes a request to have their dispute settled in arbitration rather than court. This in order to adhere to a non-disclosure agreement that was in place. Arbitration is where a case goes to a private settlement out of court, as opposed to being presented in front of a judge and jury. It's worth noting, however, that Grant's side are arguing that the NDA is now void on several fronts. The filing on behalf of McMahon reads, "By publicly filing her salacious, false, defamatory claims, plaintiff has blazonly and intentionally violated a binding contract to arbitrate. The complaint's outrageous claims of sexual abuse and coercion are pure fictional, plainly intended to garner publicity, and are flatly contradicted by plaintiff's own contemporaneous statements. Contrary to plaintiff's false allegations, plaintiff and defendant engaged in a consensual relationship during which defendant never coerced plaintiff into doing anything and never mistreated her in any way." Grant's own legal representation would then swiftly respond to McMahon's claim, labeling his version of the truth as false, and they would say, "Vince McMahon has never known a storyline that he doesn't twist to fit his own shameful narrative. Her father was in-home hospice during his final days, where Janelle continued to care for him around the clock. Prior to his death, she had been caring for her blind, wheelchair-bound mother. Using the grief of someone who lost both of her parents is an all-new level of disgusting." This would then be followed by an official motion to strike Vince McMahon's attempts to take the case out of court, and the filing reads, "McMahon's easily refuted lies have no place in this case. It was not necessary, reasonable, or responsible to use a public filing to impugn Janelle's moral character. Indeed, McMahon's desperate attempt to distract from the legal substance of the motion highlights its weakness and the weakness of his overall case. The court has inherent power to strike a party's filings. Accordingly, Janelle respectfully requests that the court exercises that power to strike the motion's preliminary statement in its entirety and admonish McMahon and his counsel that such statements have no place in civil litigation."